Hello, delegates. A very good evening to all of you, and welcome to this surprise segment that we have today. Can you all hear me first of all? If you can, just put it in the chat below so that we know you can hear me. And did you guys enjoy the debate of the 2 days of the conference? Also, did you guys pass the resolutions, or was there one delegate in your council who was like, no, I will not give you the one vote that you need for the 66.67%? But keeping that aside, let's move ahead. Without any further ado, let me introduce the guests for today's segment. Today, we have somebody who serves as the Senior Vice President of IIMUN. He also heads the Substance Department. He goes by the name of Rishi Jain. Now, some of you might be wondering, but isn't this Rishi Jain, the host of the day? Yeah, that is me. I was just trying to crack a joke, but as you can see, I'm not that funny. So let's move forward with the actual segment. To invite the two luminaries that we have today, let me call upon someone who is very, very, very special in the organization. Not me, but somebody who is the brains and the actual person who's founded this organization. He is a former international chess player, an author, a guest lecturer, a managing partner of Offline Group of Companies, co-founder of Taking India Forward Foundation, and also the president of IIMUN. I'm so glad to welcome Mr. Rishabh Shah to take the session forward from you. Over to you, Rishabh.
Great, fantastic. So today we have somebody really special joining us. He's come to the platform earlier, and I don't know what's wrong with him that he's chosen to come back again. But let me introduce somebody who's a friend and a guide and who's inspired so many across the country. He's reinvented storytelling. He's made epics look epic again, quite honestly, when most of this fraternity just aped the West in both style and mannerism. He's helped millennials rediscover India's glorious past through 9 books which he's written, and that quite honestly is more number of books than I've read in my entire life. I'm thrilled and delighted to welcome somebody who shares the same belief of uniting the world the Indian way. He's the director of the Nehru Center, and he's also sold 5.5 million copies of his books. Now, that's the same number of books that I've sold, but we should remove the million after that. So it's just 5.5 copies of my books that are sold with only 5.5 million of his. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please put your virtual hands together for none other than Amish Tripathi. Amish, thank you, and welcome once again.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure being here, Rishabh. And yes, you are right. I don't know what was wrong with me that I came back. I guess I'm a glutton for punishment. But I really love interacting with you. It kind of energizes me. So that was my only compliment for the day. After this, no compliments.
I mean, this is not done. This is not done given the fact that we put together this beautiful set for you, but we're joined by somebody equally special today, Amish. And we have today with us somebody who's equally special, and she's studied psychology, then cleared IAS, and then eventually become a teacher. She's dedicated her life the last 15 years teaching grade 9, 10, 11, and 12. The name has Bhavna in it, but don't be fooled by that. In the introduction in itself, they slyly put in a line. They said she's the wife of senior IPS officer Himanshu Roy. So it was basically Amish sending me a note saying, Rishabh, this time, please stick to the serious questions. Don't ask anything frivolous. And then I wore this funny-looking jacket along with the t-shirt and come here. So Bhavna ji, welcome and thank you for doing this.
Thank you so much, Rishabh. Please call me Bhavna. It's delightful being here. Truly delightful. Thank you.
And today we're here with Amish and Bhavna to discuss something which, quite honestly, I think appeals to millennials and people all across. It's about their book, but I think even beyond the book, the conversation, that is understanding the concept of dharma, basically decoding the epics for a meaningful life. And honestly, in the day and age that we live in, it's so important to strike that balance. So let me begin by asking you this, Amish. All your work, quite honestly, surrounds a central theme. You know, it also happens to be the main work of the organization, the central theme of uniting the world the Indian way, rediscovering India. Now, they've heard it from me enough number of times, but why, according to you, is it so important for the next generation to rediscover India. What can India teach you which your school and college textbooks can't? So we could start with Amish or Bhavna. One of the two.
Okay. Do you want to go first or? Okay. So, Rishabh, I'll answer this from two levels. One, the present education system that we have today, what we all largely follow across the world, is based on the Prussian education system, which started a few centuries ago, right? And then the British kind of enforced it out here. We had a different education system. The British Raj and many of the establishment historians posts that lied to us that India had no education system. Not true. We actually had a very widespread education system, which was destroyed by the British colonial Raj, which was replaced by this education system. What's the good part of the Prussian education system is that it's very good to teach you the skills of what you should do in life. Okay, all your skills, engineering, medicine, it's good at that, right? It's really good at that. The older Indian education system, the Gurukuls and Pathshalas had that as well. But one of the key things our ancestors figured out is that teaching you what to do with your life without teaching you how you should live your life is actually setting you up for disaster. It's even worse than being uneducated, okay? Because it's a bit like giving a child an AK-47. And what do you think will happen, right? It will be disastrous. The key thing that our ancient education system used to do was teach you how to live. Then they will give you the skills on what you should do in life. Unfortunately, our present education system doesn't teach that. And how you are used to learn how you should live was actually from our epics, from our stories. Ramayana and Mahabharata were the standard, like the beginners courses in all our Pathshalas and Gurukuls, besides texts on mathematics. Okay, those were the initial ones. Everyone had to study that. Then you could go further and specialize. And Ramayana and Mahabharata are supposed to teach you philosophies on how you should live your life. Since this is not there in the education system, we thought, how about if we bring out a book which essentially explains this? That philosophies that can be drawn from the Mahabharata and from my fiction books as well, which will give you suggestions on how you should live your life. And a key thing to remember, the Indian way is not prescriptive. It is not God coming down and telling you, do this, otherwise you'll go to hell. Options, these are the archetypes. Now you think about it and make your own choice, right? But before making your choice, you should at least have all the knowledge. That's what is supposed to come through that education, which is not there sadly in our present education system. We thought we'll bring out a book which actually speaks of these core philosophies. That's the first thing. The second point I want to make, which is actually in a way critical, if you think of the technologies that have come through in the last 30, 40 years, many of the technologies that you youngsters take as almost a given, the fact that you can speak to anyone, anywhere in the world instantaneously, the fact that you have access to all the information in the world, from the dawn of human civilization till now, at the click of a button, okay? The fact that you can travel wherever you want. I know there's this COVID pandemic right now, but it will go after some time. The fact that you can travel easily to wherever you want. So many of these skills, so many of these, these technologies that you have, if you lived 100 years ago, it would be like you have the power of God. The fact that you can access any information, you can talk to anyone, you can travel anywhere. You have the power of God in you, right?
Correct.
That's what technology has given to you, which gives rise to the obvious question that do you have the ability to handle the power of a God? Or will you actually end up hurting yourself? You see, social media, one of the bizarre things that's seen in the Western world, social media has led to an increase in unhappiness and depression among youngsters. It's very bizarre. It's like they have access to almost everything in the world and they're unhappy, they're depressed, right? Is it because actually no one is teaching them how to live their life, right?
Right.
So these 2 points. So we thought it makes the book sensible.
So make a book, and with your experience, I'm sure, Bhavna, you've dealt with all of them. So was this also was this the only reason? Was there more to make a book like this?
No, what Amish said is actually the nub of it. We live in, I mean, to call them even changing times is a bit of a, understatement. Social media is actually, I have recently gotten introduced to social media. I've been dragged kicking and screaming into the 21st century by my brother. Having written this book, together when we were moving towards, this release, he said to me, Didi, you've got to come onto the social media. And I said, explain to me what this means, what do you So he said, fine, I'm going to put you through to somebody, a Rishabh, Hemal Majitia, who's going to tell you what Instagram and Facebook and Twitter is all about. And I said, all right, do I really need to be here? Because, this is a book written by the two of us. I'm never going to write books on my own. It's always going to be you and I. You're there, on social media. Why do you want to drag me into this thing that I do not understand? And he said, it is critical. Either you should not have written the book with me, or if you, he said, if you have written the book with me, then you've got to play by the rules of the game today. That sounded very, very reasonable, and he cornered me, and there I was. I actually experienced what I have till last month really only been reading about. And the thing, is that, social media is a little like talking to yourself privately as well as talking to the whole world simultaneously at the same time. It's very freaky. It can freak you out. Douglas Murray says that, social media will historically probably make the invention of the printing press seem like a footnote in history. I mean, that's quite a statement,
Oh, goodness.
It is that phenomenal. And in such times, to know how to be is absolutely critical. Not just knowing what to do, but to know how to be. This book is an extremely infinitesimal first step in that direction.
It's an infinitesimal first step, but that infinitesimal first step also has very interesting concepts. Now, life is all about balance, and everyone, across generations is chasing the understanding of the concept of the word dharma. The fact that you choose to call your book Dharma is very, very interesting and very intriguing. There's this intriguing concept of dharma versus swadharma. And to my knowledge, of course, which is very little in your comparison, but swadharma is something which is very subjective in nature. The fact that everyone's duties are different and everyone's perspectives are different. So why have you chosen to call the book Dharma per se, and you speak about Swadharma in that as well, and you define Swadharma? Shouldn't Swadharma be something that should be different? I mean, isn't it different for different people? So why go ahead and define something which any which way is subject?
Very, very good question. Rishabh, I gotta say, you're getting deeper and deeper with each interview.
I've heard many questions like this before, which were supposed to be sensible, but then suddenly you went from there to somewhere else. And then you went polite and said, very interesting question.
No, because this is the nub of it, right? Because look, there are various terms that could have been used, right, for this book. Morality, virtue, but all of them have, a lot of baggage with it. Because a lot of them come with judgment that you should do this, you should not do this. Dharma is in that sense one of the key things of dharma, which is often erroneously translated as religion. It's not religion. Dharma is actually beyond religion. Panth is religion, right? Dharma is even even beyond religion. Dharma is what keeps the universe together, what balances the universe, what what holds it together, what is the right way to do things, right? And to understand dharma, one of the key things they used to say was it's not a set of simple, rules to follow, because there's always a context and you have to understand it. And your personal context, in effect, sets up your swadharma. Swa is you, your swadharma. So how does this translate? That might sound a little complex, but how does it translate into practice, right? So we are ordinary citizens. For us, our swadharma is we should never break the law, take the law into our own hands and commit acts of violence. We're not allowed to do it. That's our swadharma. Why? Because we've chosen to live in a law-abiding country.
Right.
If we actually, and the country has the rule that anyone who takes the law into their own hands, commits acts of violence, is going to face trouble, right? But if you're a soldier and you're at the border, then your swadharma is to commit violence, right? And a soldier can think, what's the guy on the other side? He might be a Pakistani, fine. We can have questions with the Pakistani state, with the Pakistani generals. But a Pakistani soldier is simply doing what his swadharma is. Correct. And you'll notice at a deeper level, so many, I can't say one sees it in the Pakistani army, but you see it in the Indian army. During the Kargil war, during many other wars, if a Pakistani soldier fought with honor and died, and in the Kargil war, the Pakistani army was refusing to accept that they were Pakistani soldiers, right? They were refusing to accept the body back.
Of course.
Indian soldiers wrote out citations for the Pakistani soldiers saying this one fought with honor, he fought with bravery, he deserves an award, right? And they gave the body back with honor. Now, if you think about it, that is the swadharma of an Indian soldier, that he will fight because it's his duty. He's protecting India, he's protecting his country, it's his swadharma. But he will fight it with dharma, he'll fight it with honor. So he will, if he has to kill the Pakistani soldier, he will kill the Pakistani soldier. But if he sees a brave Pakistani soldier on the other side, he will acknowledge it, right? So therefore, that Indian soldier's swadharma is different from our swadharma as a normal citizen. Who decides? Only we decide. Only I can decide what my swadharma is. Only you can decide what your swadharma is. Only Bhavna Di can decide what her swadharma is. No one else has the right to decide. And we decide that basis the principles of dharma. That's what one is trying to explain through the book. No one should tell you this. I certainly want to say to all of you youngsters watching out there, no one has the right to tell you how you should live your life. No one. Only you can decide. But when you make a decision, think of the broader context, right? So that you make a conscious decision. Because you realize that every decision of yours has consequences, positive or negative. You can choose to be a smuggler, right? It's your choice. No one can stop you. And you'll have consequences of that. If you say your swadharma is to be a smuggler, you might land up in jail, God knows what else will happen to you, right? So think through your swadharma in the context of dharma. That's a concept.
Very, very interesting answer. And let me take this to Bhavna as well. You were talking about you spoke about the fact that Instagram and Twitter and things like that you're new to. And I want to ask you this. We live in a day and age of Kali Yuga in and according to many of these scriptures and many of the epics that you refer to. In this book, you're talking about utopian concepts, many which are utopian concepts, and some which honestly seem which seem surreal in the sense that I think it's very difficult to translate it into day-to-day practice, because today you would have trained grade 9, 10, 11 and 12, the ones who are watching right now, right? So you've trained them, so you know that hustle is like the new buzzword. And on social media, everyone is hustling, right? You can say, Amish, smile, because this is always the case with social media influencers saying, आप जितना ज़्यादा hustle कर सकते हो, 24 घंटे में 36 घंटे निकाल दो. So in this Kali Yuga of peer pressure, academic stress, and the desire to keep desiring, every human being, especially in this age bracket.
Rishabh, sorry. Can I just cut in? You said something so wise. The desire to keep desiring. It's Extremely wise line. I'm gonna use this at a few other places. I'll of course always give the credit to you.
No, no,
Very wise line. Yeah.
it's a 16-year-old who's written the line, so I've just memorized it. No, no,
But a very wise line. Very wise line. It's true. It's like a freaking treadmill we are on.
no, but it's true, and the desire to keep desiring.
sorry.
It actually keeps and it's very true. You one goal after the other, and how do you find, Bhavna, how do you find that balance as a 14, 16, 19, 21-year-old? How do you find that balance when right from school you are only taught about you're seeing greed, envy, and anger. That is just on a normal day-to-day basis. You're observing that in your ecosystem. How do you find that balance? And is your book in a way slightly, they're talking about utopian concepts like that when the day-to-day kid is actually dealing with all of this, because like Amish said, it's the desire of keeping to, the desire of desiring more and more is something that is imbibed in the student right from the start. So your thoughts on this?
I love that line. The desire to, keep desiring more and more. And, Rishabh, really, this book of ours, Dharma, it is in the garb of utopian concepts. It's really discussing, events, emotions, situations in life that we all have gone through, go through during times of social media, and have gone through even before social media happened, because it isn't as if the social media has created concepts like desire, envy, anger, hustling, even hustling, the hustling of 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, Chicago and New York, to this day stands unbeaten.
Right.
So, human nature is human nature.
Very true.
Social media is merely just another avenue, to express, the good, the bad, the ugly of human nature. You asked about, is the book dealing with the 2, 9, 10th, 11th grade children? We examine these things very particularly. The difference between, for instance, wanting and having.
Right.
We've created some actually characters
Right.
in this book. It's a family. It's a husband and wife, and the wife's parents, the husband's parents-in-law. So this family is sort of, sitting together with their own baggages, their own personalities, their own equations. They are in conversation about these deep concepts through the characters of Mahabharata and, the characters from Amish's Meluha series. Now, we discuss, like I said, things like wanting and having. For instance, there's a dialogue between the mother-in-law and the son-in-law about the son-in-law's penchant to keep buying deodorants, and Lopamudra, the mother-in-law, teases, her son-in-law that, are you going to stop buying deodorants? And he said, the son-in-law Nachiket says, but, I'm not stealing anybody else's deodorant. I'm buying deodorants that I'm passionate about from money that I earn. What's wrong with it? And the mother-in-law says to him that, nothing wrong at all. There's nothing wrong with having. There's nothing wrong. There's no problem with even pleasure. Merely, what you need to be aware of is that pleasure is transitory. It will disappear. And then the mother-in-law challenges him and says, Nachiket, are you still delighted with and gleeful about the last deodorant you bought? Do you even remember the name? And, she tells him, go ahead and buy your next deodorant tomorrow morning. Enjoy it. But be mindful that, the pleasure is going to disappear, and it should be equally all right, if you never buy a deodorant ever again for the rest of your life. Equanimity. So these are the ways in which we have played with these notions that we all still, even I still desire.
But you're dealing with this in a very interesting way. You said you're going to be, you've created characters and then you've also borrowed examples and excerpts from Amish's books and then combined the two. And then you're trying to tackle this problem to teach people the balance of life. Am I correct in understanding that that is what the synopsis of this book essentially is?
Spot on.
Spot on.
If I may interject over here and talk about Swadharma and Dharma.
Please.
For instance, we have discussed Swadharma and Dharma in the book by using Amish's Ravan book. So we have used Vedvati to, embody Dharma. And we have examined Swadharma through, for instance, Kumbhakaran's, complete loyalty to Ravan. Kumbhakaran is a man who is, who has a sense of center, a sense of Dharma. And yet the man, not blindly, with his eyes open, follows his elder brother because that is his Swadharma. So it's very interesting, these things. Now, is Kumbhakaran right? Is he wrong? Is there such a thing as right and wrong? These are very interesting concepts.
Interesting.
Yeah, because the thing in that, just building on what Bhavnadi says, it's so true, because Kumbhakarna is aware that Ravan is not a good man, right? He's also aware that Ravan could have been a better man if things had worked out for him and Vedvati. And he also is aware that he has no choice. His task is to be with his elder brother and do what he can. And what that also means is he's deeply unhappy in his life, right? But he has no choice. So that's his Swadharma. And that's what makes it a very complex concept, that he's not in denial. He doesn't think that, oh, his brother's a great guy, Ravan is a wonderful man. No, he's not in denial of it. He knows what Ravan is, and yet he will be loyal to him. That is Swadharma.
That is Swadharma. But one thing about Duryodhana, on a slightly lighter note, that I really, one thing about, Kumbhakaran, one thing which I particularly liked about him and his, the entire concept of his Swadharma was that he loved sleep. Now, as a child who was twice the size that you can currently see, I really enjoyed it in my formative years. Of course, now young people keep me on my toes. But it is a very subjective thing. I also mentioned. I also want to mention some characters from Mahabharata, because you have also taken excerpts and you compared situations from Mahabharata. Just like Kumbhakaran, there was also Karna. Now everyone wants a friend like Karna, but nobody wants to be Karna. What would you tell the young people who are watching today, that why is it important, if at all according to you, to be both Karna and have a friend like Karna?
Didi, I think you should answer this.
So this is, if we may say so ourselves, very interestingly handled in the book. In fact, the family comes to a bit of a, there is
family in the book, huh? Family in the book, not family as in us.
Yeah. So the family in the book,
has an argument.
And there are strong emotions. The daughter Gargi, for her, Karan is a touch me not. I mean, nobody can say anything bad about him, because Karan is her hot favorite. In fact, almost throughout her book, she's sort of waiting for the family to start talking about Karan. Because they're talking about, Sati, and they're talking about Parvateshwar, and I want to get to Karan. Karan is very complex, very complex. Here's this Pandav, who's fighting on the side of the Kauravas. Why is he, why is he so tragic? Why is he everybody's favorite? I mean, we all love Karan. What is it with him? Glorious man, generous man, large-hearted. Even Lord Krishna praises him, on the battlefield repeatedly, to the consternation of Arjun. And yet, here's this Panda who's on the side of Kaurav. Now, in our book, we've also examined, good and bad in a more interesting manner. I mean, it's, are Pandavas good? Kauravs bad? I mean, didn't Pandavas have weaknesses? Did not the Kauravs have redeeming qualities? And yet, the bottom line is that somehow had the Kauravs won Khatatta, it wouldn't have seemed right.
It felt wrong.
Yeah, it would have felt wrong. Pandavas had to have won. Now, why? Why should the Pandavas have to have, won? And then why is Karna on the side? So these are concepts that, we are examining in the book. His loyalty to Duryodhana, his unquestioning loyalty, good, bad. Is it praiseworthy? Is it not praiseworthy? What about current sense of sadness, his consciousness, his constantly being aware that, he was wronged, very rightly so, he was wronged. But it was, the narrative that had almost converted itself into a sad song in his psyche, I've been wronged. Very interesting. So, Rishabh, you should read the book.
I should read it. No, you already got one person who's buying the book, but in this case, I'm guessing you're going to gift it to me, right? I'm not going to buy. I want
a signed copy will be coming to you, Rishabh. But that doesn't. But that still means you have to buy one. No, you have to buy one more. But a signed copy will come to you as well. You'll have 2 copies.
2 copies, Rashmi. See, these are the brides that I asked for, and this is what Amish says. This is the problem that we have. I mean,
Rishabh,
I'm basically an MBA, and I'm a hustler. So we need to sell the book.
And Rishabh, I am a teacher. Therefore, you may beg, you may borrow, you may steal. I just want you to read the book.
Nice. Spoken as a true lady amongst the conversation, amongst all of. But let me take you to the MBA that Amish has got, and the MBA that he just mentioned has also catapulted him, not just his education but his literature, and now of course his status as one of the most powerful people in our country. Forbes regularly lists him in the 100 most powerful people across the country. I finish at 102 always, so you don't see my name, because young people are wondering, saying, Rishabh, why don't we see you? So I finish at 102. Amish finishes always in the top 100. But no more seriously.
I know you're there, Rishabh, because I get to see the list till 150, so I've seen your name regularly.
Oh goodness! But Amish, let me ask you this: that is the concept of power. The concept of power, which is the 4th question that I wanted to ask you. The 4th question I want to ask you is the concept of power is in school. It's embedded in us from school, right? For a school captain's election also, all the way to big business houses, we're always competing against each other. This concept of wanting to be the most powerful person around is something that we've been taught, जब से छोटे थे तो शर्मा जी की बेटी देखो ये कर रही है वो कर रही है ऋषभ तुम क्या कर रहे हो खाली खाना खा रहे हो दूसरा कुछ नहीं कर रहे हो so things like that always keep coming in, right? So this anglicized education system that you spoke about, it's taught us more to compete, it's taught us more to divide rather than come together. And isn't it better, hypothetically, if you were education minister of our country for, let's assume, for a year, and you had this opportunity of reforming the education system, do you think it would be better to have modern international gurukuls in comparison to the current education system that we're having in our country?
Rishabh, I couldn't agree more. Fortunately, there's a new national education policy that's come out, which is genuinely a visionary document and which addresses many of these issues. But, the key thing, it boils down to this again, that education, modern education actually teaches you skills on what you can do with your life. It doesn't teach you how you should be, how you should live your life, what philosophies you should have. So like, to use your example of power, You know, modern education might probably teach you the skills of how you should get power, right? So you know, how to be a leader, how to be articulate, how to, you know, motivate people. You know, all these skills will be taught to you in MBA schools or everywhere else, but it doesn't teach you the more fundamental concept that what is power for, right? One of the things that you find that is so different from the Indian way, the ancient Indian way, and frankly, many of the ancient pagan ways, and the modern Western route that's come to us. That power is almost, you know, in the Western way, is like a leader who has power. It gives him the right to do whatever he desires, right? Whereas in the ancient Indian way, power was not a right, it was a responsibility.
Correct. Correct.
You'll notice one of the key differences. Why would, you know, Yudhishthira behave differently from a Duryodhana on how they saw power, right? Or how would Lord Ram behave differently from Ravan on how they saw power, right? For Lord Ram, getting power meant that his desires mean nothing. He has to do everything for his people. That's what power meant to him. And that is the model that's looked up to in the Indian way. For Ravan, power meant I can do whatever the hell I want. Right?
Right.
And you'll notice almost instinctively, we Indians tend to go for, in leaders, I'm not saying in ourselves, but usually in our leaders, we like to go for the Lord Ram model. Right? Like one of the things you've noticed, I'm not speaking about any one particular leader, I'm speaking across, you see in the last 70 years, have you noticed Indians tend to like leaders who are single, right? They tend to vote, and I'm saying across, male, female, right? Which is not so in the West. Do you notice in the West, the leader has to show a family. He has to, not just a family, he even has to show a dog, you know, like it's one entire package. Whereas Indians tend to go for, you know, like he or she is single. Why is that? It's like subliminal, it comes down from our epics, because we see that if he has no one around him, he or she, then they will use power for what it should be used for, not for their personal desires, for the good of the people. That's a model we look up to. It's not the model of the West, right?
It's not the model.
Is this something that should be taught? Yes, of course it should. Because then anyone who gets a position of power will become even more responsible. Because 10,000 years of culture will tell him, now you have no right to over your own desires. You only have duties towards your people.
Very, very well put, Amish, very well put. Power is like a notional construct, and let me just take that to Bhavna ji. It's a notional construct, and I have also fundamentally believed that true power lies in giving. It's the altruism that is associated with the individual, which will actually give that person the so-called notional value of what we call today power. And this is something that we see in our epics, we've seen across. But in today's definition, do you think in today's education system, my question to you is, do you think that you see the fact that is that altruism being imbibed in young people, or is that something that's missing from curriculum?
The finer aspects of human character and reigning in human temperament are not handled, unfortunately, in the current education system. There's a woeful lack. It has to be, and it's so urgent now in times like these to show us how to navigate and reorganize our inner architecture. We are like, we should be taught to breathe, pranayam, taught to sit well, to eat well, to speak well, to discuss with respect, contrary points of view, but respect is a given, and there is a vast space that exists between respect and disrespect. Disrespect is to be shunned, come what may. These are things that really need to, and talking about power, nothing wrong with power, Krishna had power, Ram had power. Adults must have power over their children. Absolutely, authority is legitimate power, and power is a central element in authority. Also, what we need to be able to understand is the prism through which we need to look at certain human relationships. Relationship A from B, from C, from D. Do I look at this particular prism of relationship from love or from power? Everything is not power. Having discussed power, because certain prisms, certain relationships must be looked at from the prism of love. And ironically so, again, in the book we've discussed Anandmayi and Parvateshwar, because Anandmayi is all love, wo dil hai. And she doesn't seek to exercise power. She will not tolerate anybody's dominion over her, including Lord Shiva's. She only exudes and gives love, but she exercises the ultimate power over Parvateshwar. The ultimate power over Parvateshwar is sheer love.
But it's very true, right? The more you love, the more selflessly you love, the more powerful you are as a person technically. But the fact that should get across to millennials across is, I think, what your book does. And I'm so glad that you've written and put this together. Let me take you to the last question. The last question that I have is always a slightly light-hearted, fun question. Now, Bhavnaji is wondering, saying, what was the rest of the conversation then? But and the last one is slightly even more so. So I'm going to name you a character to the both of you. Characters that probably you use in the book, or characters that are very popular in Indian epics and Indian scriptures. And I would like you to give me a public figure, honestly, the first public figure that comes to your mind when I say that character. Right.
Okay.
Perfect. So we'll start with Bhavnaji first, and then I'll go quickly to Amish. So I'll give your brother 30 seconds heads up so that he gets the politically correct answer. But but let's start with, not that he needs it, but let's start with the first. And when I say Bhavnaji Sita, who's the first person that comes to your mind?
This may sound ridiculous to you, but I say me.
Oh, that's very nice. That's very nice. And Amish.
I didn't hear your question.
No. When I say Sita, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Besides my mother, actually. Honestly.
Your mother. When I say Ram, Amish, who comes to mind first?
Ooh, that is a tough one. There is a figure that comes to mind, but since I'm going to be politically correct, I will not say that.
I think Amish, you gave it away in the conversation somewhere. But who would you Bhavnaji, say that is Ram for you?
My husband.
Oh yeah.
This is and your husband, I'm sure, is going to be smiling when he sees this conversation. But when we talk about Duryodhana, Amish, who's the first person that comes to mind?
Abey Saleh, you're going to get me into trouble. There is a person who comes to mind, but I will not answer. I know exactly what you're trying to do. And
listen,
as you know, we hate to sell books through controversy.
But where am I asking you to take political figureheads only? I am saying I'm giving you the vast prism of choice. You're thinking your perspective, Amish.
Okay. Since the way you're pushing it right now, you.
Okay, so but let me ask you this, Bhavnaji.
No, but you're like, actually, I take that back. You're not like Duryodhana. You're like Narad. Have you heard of Rishi Narad? Yeah, the troublemaker You know, like if there was firewood anywhere, you know, his almost instinctive words was take out a matchstick and just light the fire.
Listen, Amish, I'm not a journalist. I'm not trying to catch you. I was simply trying to distribute to Times of India and earn some money. That's not simply organization. But no, I'm joking. But Bhavna ji, when I say Shakuni, who's the first person that comes to mind?
To begin with, you've got to withdraw the G. Call it
Correct.
I'm forgetting the name of the Game of Thrones character, the guy who the guy who looked after the finances of the kingdom.
Yeah, the eunuch, right?
No.
The dwarf.
The other guy, no, not Tyrion. Not Tyrion. No, certainly not. Tyrion is honorable. How can I forget that name? The one who leads, who saves Sansa.
Right.
The one with the beard. The one with the beard and with the locket.
The little goatee beard.
Yes. I'm forgetting the name, but yes.
We're going to call him the goatee man.
Yeah, the
goatee man.
The goatee man.
Yeah,
The goat.
He's Shakuni. Yeah.
He was the goat. Goat as in Bakra, not goat as in greatest of all time.
Yeah, Amish clarified that from after this conversation, after you all have seen this, we're going to delete that part and we're just going to say that Amish basically compared the villain in Game of Thrones to GOT. That is greatest of all time. This is going to be the breaking news tomorrow.
What did I say? Find firewood, will light fire.
But I'm going to give you an easy one. I'm going to give you the last three, and I'm going to give, these are very simple. Arjun. Amish, when I say Arjun, what is the first thought that comes to mind?
Seeker, man. So I would say all Indians right now, we're on a path and we're going to win.
We're going to win. Dronacharya, when I say Dronacharya, Bhavna, what's the first thought that comes?
Oh, this is very difficult, Rishabh. These are not easy questions. Dronacharya.
I'm supposed to be slightly intellectual, only slightly. So that's why I asked these few couple here and there. No, we'll give this a pass. Listen, if you're on a popular TV show, I don't want to name the show, but if you're on a popular TV show where there was a buzzer and there was a host and there was a hamper to be given, I'd have to give the hamper to myself. Doing very badly on this. But
I will send a hamper to you of all my books.
Okay, so this is the easiest. Okay, this is the easiest of them all, and the last one. To the both of you, when I say Ravan, who's the Ravan? Who is the first person that comes to mind to the two of you? Now I'm Narad, so you can't call me Ravan, alright?
Can I say honestly, I genuinely mean it honestly. I think in the modern day, actually, there's a bit of a Ravan in all of us. If you think about it, what is Ravan basically? People who, desires with no control, anger with no control, jumping to conclusion, tremendous capability, but using it to hurt ourselves rather than using it for a higher purpose. This is true of most of us modern people, actually, if you think about it, especially the educated. Often I think the problem with us is not our skills. The problem is our own mind management. In that sense, actually, Ravan is in all of us across the world. One of the bizarre things I see so much in the West, young, educated, the elite youth, I find them so angry. They're the most privileged generation in history. And they're still so angry. And one of the things that strikes me is, what are you so angry about? I mean, you're the most privileged generation in history. And I'm not saying the world is perfect, but the world will never be perfect. And if you find things worth improving, then improve it. But this thing to be angry with the entire world, angry with their parents, angry with society, isn't that a bit of a Ravan actually? in us.
Very, very well said, Amish. Very well said. Very profound manner of concluding those concluding remarks. But Bhavna, let me come to you.
But sorry, that wasn't a fun answer which would light the fire. Unlike what you wanted, Narad. I'm going to call you Narad from now.
पता नहीं आपने नारद इतने शरीफ questions पूछता हूँ मैं but let me go come to Bhavna, you're the nicer one. See, next time we're going to call Bhavna only, we're not going to call Amish or all these books. Whenever you're calling Bhavna, she's a sweet one. but Bhavna, please, what according to you is the Ravan in our times?
I can, off the cuff think of Hitler. Hitler was the Ravan of our times, of the 20th century. Certainly Hitler. And Hitler too was a very, very complex character with a very complex life. And he also had a very troubled childhood. He had a troubled relationship with his father. He had a mother complex. Very complex character, quite a Ravan of the 20th century, I'd say. Incidentally, Shakuni's little finger.
but there is, as we conclude this, it's been a pleasure speaking to the two of you. And as Amish said, there's good and bad amongst within all of us. It's about seeing, trying to identify the bad, working on it, and trying to build upon the good. And of course, for the few like me who are given the title of being Narad, we won't light a fire. But remember that statement that Amish made, that the goatee man in Game of Thrones is the GOAT of all times. that is my takeaway from the conversation. Also, the other takeaway is, of course, that Dharma decoding the epics for a meaningful life, quite honestly, seems already to be it's promising to be a compelling read. The conversation was, as usual, delightful with the ever-smiling assassin. Very polite with words, but also very sharp, Amish Tripathi. And along with him, somebody who's been the lady of the conversation in every sense, and has added that somberness and added that sensibility to the conversation that all of us needed. Bhavna and Amish Tripathi. It's been a pleasure and a privilege having the two of you doing this. Thank you very much.
Thanks, my friend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wow, that was a wonderful segment. Thank you so much, Mr. Amish and Mrs. Roy, for that interesting talk and enlightening us about the new book, Decoding Dharma. It's a very important question that we ask ourselves. What is Dharma? And we have very little understanding of it. But this talk, I'm sure, has helped us truly understand what it means. Thank you once again for joining us today. Now, delegates, I'm sure that all of you want a signed copy. So I'm very happy to make this announcement that at IIMN, we will be distributing a free signed copy of this one particular book to all you delegates present in this concourse. I can see you are very excited for this book, aren't you? I'm just kidding. You have to purchase your own book because I can't buy books for all of you. But then again, my stupid jokes aside, and I will now let all of you move forward to your committees and pass those declarations like you mentioned in the chat before that they are yet pending. So thank you so much, delegates, for joining, and you can now return to your councils. All the best and see you all. Thank you. Bye-bye.